Imagine tomorrow your name trending worldwide for all the wrong reasons. That's exactly what a young boy in the Ottoman Empire might have felt the moment a shadowy stranger knocked on the door of his village home. His small fingers still sticky from breakfast, his heart pounding at the sight of unfamiliar horses and men. He barely understands the danger, but instinct tells him to run. Most modern people would faint before the real show even starts. In that moment, the line between a fleeting adventure and the abrupt erasure of childhood is paper thin. So, before we start, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. As the room softens around you, lean back and allow this story to unfold, an experience unlike anything you've listened to until now. Somewhere deep in the woods, a shadowed caravan waits, and a life is about to twist in ways no bedtime story could prepare you for. The boy is thrust onto a wagon crowded with others of his age, a dozen frightened faces pressed against each other. The air smells of dust, horse sweat, and fear. He wonders naively if he will see his mother again. The captor's eyes are sharp and unsympathetic. Historians still argue whether some were truly trained soldiers or just opportunistic kidnappers, but either way, their efficiency is undeniable. A fringe theory suggests that some villages staged mock kidnappings to curry favor with Ottoman officials, a disturbing insight into how normalized the practice had become. The journey is grueling. Some boys weep quietly, others scream until their throats are raw. Nights bring cold and a loneliness heavier than the wagons themselves. Quirky as it seems, one boy insists on bringing a small wooden carving of a horse for comfort, a tiny rebellion against the crushing weight of inevitability. He hides it under his shirt at night, feeling absurdly heroic. They arrive at the coastal city, an imposing place of stone walls and labyrinthine alleys. The market noise is overwhelming. The calls of merchants, the braying of animals, the clanging of tools. Here, the boys are separated, tested, examined. Officials measure their hands, assess their voices, and sometimes even observe their playfulness, deciding who is suited for palace service. The process feels clinical, a brutal audition for a life none of them chose. By now, the boy's stomach knots. Sleep is a luxury he cannot afford, nor would he want it. There is a strange camaraderie forming among the captives, a mix of fear, whispered jokes, and silent understanding. One boy tries to teach another how to whistle a tune they both remember from home. In a moment of levity, he accidentally whistles a sharp note that scares a stray dog into the fountain. Everyone laughs quietly, the sound bouncing off the stone walls like a temporary shield against reality. As they are marched toward the palace gates, the boy glances at the guards, wondering if courage is a currency he might have been robbed of, just like his freedom. This is where childhood ends, yet somehow, the smallest sparks of identity survive. And just as he begins to adjust to the rhythm of forced obedience, a new horror looms, whispered in the corridors of the palace. A procedure so feared, it has legends in every village, every tavern, and every market square, waiting like a shadow to claim him next. The day arrives, and the palace air feels heavier than the stones it's built from. The boy is led into a small chamber, its walls echoing every anxious heartbeat. He notices a faint scent of herbs and unwashed linen, a mix designed to both calm and confuse. Imagine a modern hospital crossed with a medieval torture chamber. That is the first impression. His companions sit stiffly, gripping each other's hands, whispering nonsense to mask their terror. Historians still argue whether the procedure was always performed with rudimentary anesthesia or merely a mixture of alcohol and blunt distraction. A fringe note mentioned some eunuchs believed singing softly could chase away the pain demons, an odd superstition that persists in whispered anecdotes. The boy is instructed to lie on a coarse mat. His limbs tremble, a combination of fear, exhaustion, and anticipation of a life that will never feel the same. The castration tools themselves are a cruel museum exhibit, sharp, crude, yet meticulously maintained. The operators are practiced, their motions almost surgical in repetition. One odd observation from Ottoman records suggests that some surgeons treated the boys with a kind of clinical detachment, bordering on ritualistic artistry, framing the procedure as both punishment and rite of passage. Pain, of course, is inevitable. The boy's vision blurs, the room spins, time distorts. Even now, the modern mind recoils. Imagining the unbearable moment when body and identity fracture simultaneously, he clings to the image of his small wooden horse, a tiny talisman against the storm of sensation. It is absurd, a foolish comfort, but it reminds him that some part of his past life remains intact. Recovery is a liminal state, more haunting than the procedure itself. In a dim corner, other boys lie silently, each lost in their own mind, each trying to define what they still are. Palace attendants whisper advice on posture, diet, and correct behavior, framing survival as a combination of obedience and invisibility. It's strange to imagine these children becoming both servants and confidants, their new identities simultaneously powerful and powerless. The aftermath is complicated. Some boys, remarkably resilient, adapt quickly, discovering that palace life offers privileges unavailable to ordinary children, luxurious quarters, training in languages, music, and etiquette. Yet the psychological weight is constant. Bonds form as a form of resistance. One boy hides tiny sketches beneath his pillow, small rebellions captured in ink that no one can confiscate. Outside the chamber, the palace hums with routine. Courtiers move like a synchronized dance, completely oblivious to the private tragedies unfolding behind closed doors. One of the more bizarre historical notes mentions eunuchs once being credited with predicting palace intrigue through their observations, as if their altered bodies conferred unusual perception. The boy cannot reconcile this with the loss he feels, yet he senses the curious ways power and suffering intertwine. As the sun sets over the marble courtyards, painting shadows across gilded walls, he realizes the world has changed. Every laugh, every footstep carries a silent reminder of what he lost and what he must now embody. And in that fleeting moment of twilight, whispers in the corridors hint at a darker, even more controlling aspect of palace life, one that will test not just his body, but his mind, loyalty, and cunning in ways he cannot yet imagine. The boy, now officially a eunuch, learns quickly that palace life is less about freedom than subtle navigation. The harem, with its delicate latticework and perfumed hallways, is a labyrinth of rules, secrets, and shifting alliances. Each corridor echoes with the careful clicks of slippers, the faint rustle of silk, and the near imperceptible shuffle of servants moving between shadows. He moves like a ghost, observing without fully participating, his senses trained to notice every whisper, every stolen glance, and the slightest tension in a room. Historians still argue whether eunuchs were more feared or more pitied by the court. Their place in society seems contradictory, both powerful as intermediaries and entirely vulnerable due to their enforced alteration. A fringe tidbit mentions that some eunuchs kept tiny birds in cages, ostensibly for moral companionship, but the clever ones trained them to deliver secret messages, turning a tiny songbird into a miniature spy. Daily routines are a curious blend of privilege and humiliation. He wears silk garments, his hair brushed meticulously, and is instructed in music, etiquette, and languages. Every day is filled with lessons designed to sharpen his mind while reminding him of his limitations. Yet each step is fraught with potential danger. A wrong look, a misplaced word, or failure to bow correctly could bring shame or punishment. The harem's beauty is a kind of gilded cage, offering safety from the outside world while simultaneously enforcing the strictest internal surveillance. Imagine the pressures of modern corporate life, only amplified by centuries of ritual, secrecy, and psychological games designed to test obedience and cunning. Friendships among eunuchs are fragile but vital. Bonds form from shared suffering, yet rivalries simmer just beneath the surface. They whisper advice, cover mistakes, and sometimes trade small tokens of rebellion. A stolen pastry here, a late-night conversation there. The boy learns to carve intricate designs into wooden spoons and furniture, leaving symbols only other eunuchs can interpret. These tiny acts of defiance, seemingly insignificant, give him a sense of agency, a way to assert identity in a life designed to erase it. A small joke shared quietly with a friend, a secret smile exchanged in the shadows. These fleeting moments of humanity are crucial survival tools. The palace is a stage for manipulation and power dynamics. Eunuchs serve as messengers, confidants, and occasionally scapegoats. Their unique status gives them access to secrets while ensuring they remain under constant suspicion. Some historians argue that eunuchs stabilized court politics, while others suggest their presence only perpetuated intrigue. The boy quickly learns that influence is measured not by commands, but by subtle observation: which conversations to overhear, which gestures to ignore, which alliances to form in silence. The ability to remain unseen, yet deeply informed, becomes a kind of currency, and navigating this delicate balance is an exhausting, yet necessary education. Despite the pressures, there are moments of surprising warmth. A kind mistress offers him a rare smile, a fleeting acknowledgement of his existence as more than a tool of the palace. A fellow eunuch teaches him a song from the forests of his childhood, bringing back memories of a life long erased. These moments are brief, yet profoundly humanizing, offering a small relief in a world governed by unyielding rules and constant surveillance. They remind him that survival is as much a matter of mental resilience as physical endurance, that even in spaces designed for control, there can exist sparks of connection and understanding. Over time, he observes the subtle hierarchies among the eunuchs themselves. Some gain favor through charm, others through cunning, and a few by mastering the art of silent observation. He notes the way a glance can convey a threat, a request, or a warning without words. He learns to anticipate moods, decipher hidden tensions, and navigate the intricate web of influence that spreads through every chamber and hallway. The palace operates like a living organism, each person a cell playing a specific role, and missteps can ripple outward with disastrous consequences. As weeks turn to months, he begins to understand the rhythm of palace life. The corridors hold patterns: when the guards march, when the mistresses stroll, when the eunuchs convene. He becomes adept at moving within those rhythms, blending into shadows and leveraging his invisibility to gather knowledge and protect himself. The boy also discovers the small joys permitted to him: a moment of sunlight on a balcony, a taste of fresh fruit, a whisper shared with a friend that no one else can hear. These minor comforts, though trivial in appearance, are lifelines for those navigating such oppressive structures. Nightfall transforms the harem yet again. The latticework shadows lengthen, and the perfumed corridors darken, leaving only the faint flicker of lanterns and the soft murmur of secretive movements. Whispers travel like invisible threads, carrying information about favors sought, schemes devised, and alliances tested. The boy senses that he is simultaneously part of and apart from this world, and he begins to appreciate the quiet power he wields simply by surviving and observing. By the time he curls up in his modest quarters, the weight of the day sits heavily on his shoulders. He thinks about the lessons learned, the friends gained, the small victories earned, and the unseen battles fought. The palace, with all its beauty, charm, and cruelty, is a crucible shaping not only his behavior, but the very essence of his mind. What he has endured so far is only the beginning. As he drifts into a restless sleep, the shadows whisper of trials yet to come, challenges that will test not just his body or obedience, but the ingenuity, loyalty, and resilience he must muster to survive in this complex, unforgiving world. The boy's first winter in the palace feels like a separate world entirely. Snow drifts across the courtyards, muting the usual clamor of servants, merchants, and guards. He notices the quiet first, the way sound seems absorbed by the thick white blanket that covers everything. And for a moment, he almost forgets the rituals, the constant scrutiny, and the endless watchfulness. Yet the palace's cold is as much a test as any of its human agents. Hypothermia isn't common, but discomfort becomes a tool, a subtle reminder that the body can be bent, reshaped, and controlled. Historians still argue whether palace winter routines were designed to discipline eunuchs or merely to preserve hierarchy. A fringe tidbit claims that some eunuchs secretly fashioned tiny sleds for the rooftops, racing each other along beams unseen, tiny acts of rebellion against a life otherwise tightly choreographed. Training intensifies during this period. He learns the subtleties of court etiquette, the precise angle at which to bow, the careful modulation of speech, and the art of smiling without conceding too much. The lessons are endless and exhausting, leaving no room for childhood frivolity or naive mistakes. Yet within this rigid framework, cleverness becomes survival. He observes older eunuchs maneuvering around the sultana's whims, gathering tidbits of knowledge about alliances, gossip, and influence. He begins to understand that the most critical skill is invisibility, coupled with perception. Those who fail are swiftly marginalized, their mistakes remembered like scars on palace walls. Meals are another lesson in the hierarchy. The boy is served on a small tray, meticulously arranged to reflect rank and favor. Food is nourishment, yes, but also a symbol of power dynamics. One odd record from Ottoman memoirs claims that eunuchs who mastered the timing and etiquette of eating at meals often secured influence far greater than their apparent rank would suggest, turning ordinary consumption into subtle diplomacy. Humor, surprisingly, is sometimes a weapon. A quiet joke about the overcooked lamb or the sultana's excessive use of rosewater can bond allies or provoke rivalries, always performed with caution. Social lessons extend beyond the palace proper. The boy learns to navigate external visitors, from foreign diplomats to merchants, who interact differently with eunuchs than with ordinary children. He notes the subtle ways his altered status invokes a mix of fear, curiosity, and, occasionally, respect. It is strange to realize that a body once considered incomplete can confer unexpected authority in the right circumstances. His small acts of observation, memorizing face, tone, and gesture, become a toolkit for both survival and influence. A minor slip in attention could, however, turn these advantages into liabilities. Seasonal festivities are particularly revealing. He witnesses lavish displays of wealth and ceremony, the echoes of drums and the glow of countless candles reflecting off golden surfaces. Music fills the halls, and for a brief time, he feels a sliver of awe, caught between fear and fascination. A fringe report notes that eunuchs were sometimes entrusted to lead ceremonial music because their voices, unaffected by puberty, held a clarity and purity unmatched by adults. The boy practices diligently, learning that performance is both literal and metaphorical. How one presents oneself, how one moves, and even how one speaks can alter perception and, by extension, power. Yet not all lessons are formal. Observing the palace's inner politics, he sees manipulation at every turn. Whispers that can topple favor, minor gestures that carry enormous weight, and invisible lines dividing allies from enemies. Eunuchs sometimes act as mediators, sometimes as spies, often simultaneously. He begins to see that his role is less about obedience and more about subtle intervention, a dance where overstepping or underplaying influence could be equally dangerous. This observation grows into a cautious strategy: survive first, learn second, and act only when necessary. The psychological pressure accumulates. He watches boys older than himself who have spent years within the palace walls, their personalities shaped and, in some cases, hardened by constant oversight. Some develop cunning and charm. Others sink into bitterness or despair. The boy understands that his own future depends on a careful balance. Retain empathy, but never allow vulnerability to become exposure. Oddly, some eunuchs adopt pets or small charms, believing these minor comforts protect against misfortune. He experiments with similar small talismans, finding in them not superstition, but a method of self-soothing against the relentless pace of palace life. Outside the palace, news occasionally filters in. Military campaigns, rebellions, or strange foreign customs. He notices that eunuchs are sometimes the first to hear of new policies, serving as the palace's eyes and ears. Knowledge, in this sense, becomes both shield and weapon. He learns that perception is currency. The more he notices, the more invisible power he can wield. Conversely, failure to observe can be perilous. Even a trivial oversight, a missed conversation, a misread gesture can spiral into misjudgment, affecting his position and safety. By the end of the winter, the boy has transformed in ways imperceptible to casual observers. He moves with greater confidence, his senses attuned to subtle cues, his mind cataloging every nuance of palace life. Privilege and confinement blur together, creating a new understanding of agency within restriction. The courtyard snow melts, leaving behind slippery stone and muddy pathways, a reminder that even the most beautiful conditions are tempered by hidden hazards. And yet, even as he masters his environment, the boy senses the palace's darker currents waiting, hidden powers beyond the harem, intrigues that cannot be navigated by charm or observation alone. Shadows gather not only in hallways, but in intentions, and he realizes that the real test will soon go beyond etiquette, observation, and survival. A challenge approaches that will demand cunning, courage, and a mastery of his own mind as much as the palace's rules, and the consequences of failure will stretch far beyond embarrassment or isolation. Spring arrives hesitantly, softening the palace's edges and adding an almost cruel contrast to the boy's rigid life. The gardens bloom with colors so vivid they almost feel unreal. Yet even in this beauty, the lessons continue. Every step on the mosaic paths is observed, every gesture recorded. The eunuchs' routines shift with the season, more tasks in the gardens, inspections of the decorative fountains, and ceremonies involving fragrant flowers. Historians still argue whether such seasonal duties were meant to cultivate aesthetic sensibility or to test obedience under changing circumstances. A quirky note in some accounts mentions eunuchs being tasked to arrange flowers in precise patterns, sometimes as elaborate as geometric puzzles, teaching patience while showcasing artistry. He notices too that the palace's hierarchies subtly shift with the season. Favor rises and falls as a mistress's whims change with festivals and events, and the boy becomes ever more attuned to timing, when to speak, when to retreat, and when to simply observe. Even minor gestures, a slight tilt of the head or the tone of a laugh, can signal favor or disfavor. Learning these cues becomes a full-time mental exercise. Beyond the formalities, the boy begins experimenting with alliances, testing loyalties, and observing patterns of trust and betrayal. He realizes that influence is less about authority and more about perception, a delicate balancing act of knowing when to intervene and when to remain unseen. Some eunuchs form informal councils to exchange intelligence, while others leverage their closeness to powerful women to gain temporary advantage. These networks are fluid, sometimes treacherous, and navigating them demands patience, subtlety, and emotional control. Even in lighter moments, humor and small joys sustain him. A fellow eunuch teaches him to whistle a tune so precisely that servants think it comes from a hidden bird. Another time, he discovers a forgotten courtyard nook filled with sunlight and decides it's the perfect place to practice his carvings, leaving miniature coded symbols only fellow eunuchs can decipher. These tiny acts of personal expression remind him that identity and agency, however limited, can still survive within the strictest confines. Yet, as spring deepens, he senses growing tension in the palace. Conversations are clipped, the sultana's gaze sharpens, and invisible currents of power shift unexpectedly. The boy understands instinctively that the coming months will test not only his patience and observation, but also his courage. Challenges are approaching, ones that will force him to choose between conformity and subtle rebellion, between survival and true influence, and the consequences of misjudgment promise to be more severe than he has ever faced. The palace seems to breathe differently as the boy grows older, each corridor echoing with the weight of accumulated secrets. By now, he has long since abandoned any pretense of ordinary childhood. Play has become strategy, curiosity tempered by caution. He moves through rooms like a shadow, noting the subtle tremor in a mistress's hand or the fleeting glance of a high-ranking guard. Every detail has meaning. Historians still argue whether the intelligence gathered by eunuchs shaped Ottoman policy as much as official advisors. And while some accounts overstate their influence, the boy's keen observations confirm that the right knowledge often outweighs formal authority. A fringe anecdote even claims that certain eunuchs were consulted for matters of astronomy, trusted to interpret celestial patterns in ways that would influence court decisions, a reminder that utility and trust are sometimes inseparably intertwined. The boy has learned that survival is a continuous negotiation. He understands that compliance alone is insufficient. Observation, subtlety, and timing are equally critical. Small acts, like adjusting a curtain to conceal a conversation or strategically placing oneself near a doorway to overhear discussions, provide him with leverage invisible to most. Yet the rules of this game are unforgiving. Misjudgments, whether through inattention, overconfidence, or misread signals, could render months of effort meaningless. He has seen peers lose standing overnight, some exiled to minor duties far from the court, others cast into obscurity, forgotten except in hushed palace whispers. The dynamics of trust, particularly among the eunuchs, are increasingly complex. Alliances are temporary, friendships conditional, and every interaction carries potential consequences. He notices how older eunuchs subtly manipulate younger ones, guiding or misleading with expert precision. The boy learns to detect double meanings, concealed threats, and faint expressions of favor or disdain. Humor becomes a tool for testing loyalties. A quiet joke, a shared observation, or a small act of mischief can reveal hidden bonds or simmering resentments. He develops a nuanced understanding of human behavior, a skill as vital as his formal lessons in etiquette, music, and language. The physical demands, though less severe than the initial castration trauma, continue to shape his experience. He maintains a strict regimen of posture, grooming, and fitness, aware that any lapse might signal weakness or incompetence. Sleep is regimented yet restless. The palace offers safety, but it does not forgive inattention. He discovers that mental resilience is as critical as physical compliance. Meditation and quiet observation become his allies, moments where he recalibrates and plans for the day ahead. Fringe accounts suggest some eunuchs even developed memory systems or coded note-taking methods to track conversations and palace schedules, a sort of living intelligence archive kept entirely in the mind. The boy begins to recognize patterns in the palace's political rhythms. Events are rarely spontaneous. Celebrations, inspections, and visits from dignitaries follow intricate schedules that can be predicted and leveraged. He uses these patterns to position himself advantageously, intercept information, and anticipate shifts in favor. Influence is rarely overt. It comes in the form of timely advice, discreet warnings, or precisely delivered information. In some ways, the palace operates less like a hierarchy and more like a living network, each member's movement affecting others in subtle but profound ways. Relationships with the court's women deepen in complexity. He observes that mistresses and concubines wield their own forms of power through charm, alliances, or manipulation. Eunuchs act as intermediaries, sometimes bearing messages, sometimes subtly guiding outcomes. The boy learns that influence is often exercised quietly, a word whispered at the right time, a note delivered discreetly, or a carefully concealed observation. These interactions teach him that power, even when invisible, carries weight and responsibility. Humor and empathy remain essential, tools that help navigate tensions and humanize interactions that might otherwise become mechanical. Even the smallest duties provide opportunities to observe human nature. He notes which servants respond to kindness, which respond to intimidation, and which exploit moments of distraction. Each observation becomes data for future decisions. He learns the value of discretion. The palace is a place where overreaching curiosity can be dangerous, and secrets must be treated with the utmost care. He remembers a story about a eunuch who memorized the sultan's schedule to prevent a minor disaster, a tale that underscores the value of vigilance and the subtle influence one can wield from behind the scenes. Seasons continue to pass, each bringing both routine and unpredictability. Winter chills, spring bloom, summer heat, and autumn's fading light all create subtle challenges. The boy notices how even small changes in light and temperature affect moods, alliances, and performance. These observations guide him in subtle manipulation, allowing him to time interventions with maximum effect. He learns that mastery of one's environment, however constrained, is a form of power. A playful yet revealing incident occurs when he times a conversation with a visiting diplomat to coincide with a heated debate, ensuring his words gain attention and credibility. Such calculated acts demonstrate how observation, patience, and timing can turn minor advantages into lasting influence. Despite the pressures, moments of personal expression persist. Carvings, music, and minor acts of rebellion provide solace and identity. He continues to leave coded messages for trusted companions, maintaining a private world within the palace's rigid structure. These small acts of ingenuity and communication become lifelines, reminding him of his agency and humanity. A quirky detail notes that some eunuchs used tiny origami figures to signal messages across rooms, a delicate form of artistry and espionage combined. As he grows more adept, he observes that the palace's true power lies in its ability to shape minds as much as bodies. Each ritual, lesson, and expectation forms a framework of control, but within that structure, the boy has carved space for subtle influence. He understands the duality of his existence, visible as a compliant servant, invisible as a keen observer. Knowledge, timing, and discretion are his tools. The final years of training test him in unexpected ways. Political intrigue intensifies as the Sultan's attention shifts and internal disputes arise. Eunuchs are sometimes called upon to mediate, to guide, or even to manipulate outcomes without overt acknowledgement. He realizes that mistakes now could have permanent consequences, not simply for status, but for life itself. Lessons learned in childhood, winter, and spring converge into a disciplined understanding of survival, influence, and resilience. Yet even as mastery grows, the palace holds darker truths. Stories circulate of eunuchs falling from favor, mysteriously disappearing, or meeting misfortune despite compliance and skill. The boy knows these tales are not merely warnings, but examples of the palace's unpredictable nature. Power is always temporary, influence fragile, and survival a constant negotiation. He senses that the next chapter of his life will demand more than observation or subtlety. It will require decisive action, courage, and the careful weighing of risk and opportunity. The boy, now a young man, moves through the palace corridors with an ease born of experience. Each gesture, each glance, each whispered word carries significance. He has learned to navigate the world that once seemed utterly incomprehensible, to bend the constraints of his body and environment into tools for influence. And yet, even with this mastery, he understands that the palace is always watching, always shifting, always testing. A new challenge looms, one that will define the limits of his cunning, the breadth of his endurance, and the depth of his understanding. Shadows gather at the edges of corridors and chambers, hinting at dangers unseen, while the promise of influence and recognition beckons just out of reach. The corridors of the palace gradually soften in the evening light. Candles flicker along the walls, casting elongated shadows that dance like whispers of the day just past. The boy, now seasoned by years of observation and subtle maneuvering, allows himself a rare moment of stillness. He breathes in the gentle scent of rosewater and the faint warmth from the hearth, feeling the weight of countless lessons ease slightly from his shoulders. Each step of the day, each careful interaction has honed his mind. But here, in these quiet moments, he can release some of that tension and simply exist. Outside, the gardens murmur with the wind, petals stirring as if sharing the palace's secrets with no one in particular. He watches the courtyard bathe in twilight, appreciating the rare softness of this world where time seems to stretch and the rigid rules of duty blur into gentle observation. The palace, once a place of relentless pressure, now feels almost like a living entity he understands intimately. His senses, honed over years of survival, notice details both minor and profound. The shimmer of a lantern, the faint rustle of silk, the subtle play of light across carved stone. In this quietude, he reflects on the resilience required to endure, the ingenuity needed to influence, and the subtle victories that preserve identity within confinement. Moments of personal expression, a carved figure, a whispered melody, a shared joke remain his sanctuary. Small rebellions against a life defined by observation and constraint. These quiet acts of agency, though delicate, remind him that even in the strictest structures, the human spirit endures. As the palace settles into nighttime, the boy feels both vigilance and peace intertwining. He knows tomorrow will bring fresh challenges, subtle shifts of power, and new opportunities for observation and influence. But for now, the corridors sigh, the lanterns dim, and the world softens around him. He leans back, letting the gentle rhythm of palace life soothe his mind, aware that each experience has prepared him for the uncertain future. And somewhere beyond the latticework walls, a new story waits, ready to unfold.